After rebirth, I spoiled my Yandra ex until she cried. I married Mark for 3 years. It was not until he died that I discovered from his diary that he had a morbid and paranoid desire for me. The diary reads, I envy the dog of the eldest lady. I also want to be collared by the eldest lady. I dreamed of the eldest lady and woke up wet again. I am guilty. With this shock, I was reborn 10 years ago, when Mark was the most destitute. At this time, he looked at me with cold eyes, like a wild and untamable vicious dog. I smiled and hooked my finger and said, smile, or I'll kiss you to pieces. The indifference on his face collapsed instantly. When I arrived at the school in a Rolls-Royce, Mark was selling egg-filled pancakes at the door. He was 1.86 meters tall, thin and tall, and the cheap apron outlined his thin waistline. Just looking at his back, he looked like a husband. As if he had noticed something, Mark looked up at me with indifferent and world-weary eyes, and his tone was as calm as a pool of stagnant water. $5 with egg, $4 without egg. I smiled and showed my phone. How much is it to add a friend? He tightened his hand holding the spatula and warned with a stern face, Nancy, this is not a place for you to have fun. His voice was cold and he looked like he was keeping people away. I was a little dazed. This was different from the Mark in my memory. In my previous life, my father went bankrupt and died when I was 25 years old, and my fiancé was imprisoned. I fell from a rich girl to the abyss. In order to pay off my debts, I signed a contract with an internet celebrity company, and the company arranged a 12-hour live broadcast task for me every day. If I didn't want to do it, I had to pay a huge penalty. I thought my life was over, but I didn't expect that the company was suddenly acquired by a big boss, and all the contracts that exploited people were invalidated. When I re-signed the contract, I found out that the new boss was Mark, my high school and college classmate. He was no longer depressed as a teenager. He had a calm temperament and wore a high-end tailored suit, which made him look noble and imposing. He was already an existence that I could not reach. I endured the bitterness and lowered my head. He took the pen from my hand and fell on my face with a warm gaze, which was faintly burning. Mark asked me if I was willing to marry him, and he would pay off all my debts. Seeing that I was stunned, he explained lightly that I had helped him in high school, and my father also funded him in college, so I was his benefactor. I racked my brains to think about it. The help he mentioned was nothing more than working part-time in my house for a period of time in high school. He said again, it doesn't matter if you don't want to, you don't have to worry about the money. I thought about it for only a second and simply agreed. Mark was silent for a while, lowered his dark eyes. I'm not a good person, this is a return of favor. I can give you time to think about it, don't force it. I shook my head, Mr. Mark, I am willing. In order to show that I was not forcing, I carefully hooked his little finger. Mark's hands suddenly trembled, and his whole body tensed up, like a wild animal that had escaped from a cage. His eyes were filled with strong emotions, and his gaze was so blazing that he seemed to want to swallow me in one gulp. It looked a bit scary, but when I saw his red ears, I was not afraid at all, and I boldly threw myself into his arms. After marriage, Mark respected me very much. According to the nanny, he almost treated me like an ancestor. But Mark never wanted to touch me. I shyly took the initiative to tease him. His eyes were slightly red, and even his breathing was disordered, but he restrained himself and stuffed me into the quilt, explaining in a hoarse voice, sorry, I can't do that. I glanced down and thought to myself, he was so excited that his suit pants were about to burst. I thought Mark didn't like me and married me just to repay his kindness, until after he died, I accidentally found his diary, and after opening it, my heart was beating wildly. It turned out that the cold and gentle Mark actually had such a crazy desire for me in his heart. I couldn't help thinking, this bastard made me a widow for 3 years. I don't believe I can't pry open his hard mouth in this life. Mark is busier than the president every day. He sells egg-filled pancakes in the morning, works part-time during the day, and starts a business and stays up late to write code at night. He was named the poorest campus idol in a university. It is said that when he learned that he was named campus idol, Mark didn't even blink and just asked, campus idol, can I get a discount? Everyone said that he was crazy about money. This directly led to me hiring Mark as an art model for only 200 yuan. The moment he stepped into the classroom and saw me, his steps stopped. I didn't give him a chance to regret it, and closed the door with a snap. Classmate Mark, you took my money, do you want to run away? He seemed to have just reacted, retracted his gaze from my face, sat down on the chair consciously, put his knees together, put his hands stiffly on his thighs, and his lips were tight. You can start. I looked at him with a smile. Take off your clothes. What? He raised his eyes slightly, like a frightened vicious dog. I said as a matter of course, art model, of course you have to take off your clothes, don't you have any professional ethics? After a long stalemate, Mark closed his eyes and gave in. He raised his hand and slowly unbuttoned the first button of his shirt, revealing his sexy Adam's apple, then his beautiful collarbone, and then. I praised sincerely, it looks good, Mark is pink. The 19-year-old Mark did not have the calmness and composure that he would have 10 years later. Just a few teasings, even his fair skin turned a thin layer of pink. His bony hands pressed on the waistband of his pants, as if he had endured it to the extreme. Shut up. He scolded in shame and anger. The air conditioner was set at a high temperature, and sweat flowed down his abdominal muscles and disappeared below the beautiful mermaid line. I kindly held a piece of paper to wipe his sweat, and Mark and his brother both stood up straight. I commented, so polite. Following my gaze, Mark's whole body stiffened, his face was very ugly, and he reflexively grabbed his backpack to cover it, and the veins on the back of his hands bulged, full of tension. In my previous life, it was this hand that gently patted my back countless nights and drove away my nightmares. Mark repeatedly emphasized that he was not a good person who was repaying kindness, but there was no one better than him in the world. A person who loves money so much, but he gave me his hundreds of millions of assets without reservation. What a fool. The 19-year-old Mark was not gentle. Is the painting done? I'm leaving. He had a stern face and a very impolite tone. I knew very well that this was just his bluffing disguise. I stood on tiptoe and kissed the corner of his lips. You are so good, let's stop here today. He could no longer maintain the fierce expression on his face, and took a step back while covering his kissed face. What are you doing? His dark eyes showed disbelief, like a good girl forced by a bully. I blinked innocently. It's a reward for you, don't you like it? What do you think of me? Mark pinched the straps of his school bag, and the broken hair hanging in front of his forehead blocked the emotions in his eyes. Nancy, he said in a slightly hoarse voice, I'm not that kind of person. He was so angry that his face turned red, and he walked quickly, as if there was a demon chasing him. Not long after, I received $200 from Mark on my phone, and he was determined to draw a line between us. I deliberately turned the tables. Mark, that was my first kiss, $200 is not enough. He hurriedly withdrew the message, and the dialog box kept showing that it was being input. When I came back from taking a shower, in 20 minutes, my phone was full of messages from Mark. He probably finally calmed down, and just like in the studio, he said in a hard tone, so what do you want? 5 minutes later, it was prompted that your new friend Mark had transferred $352,724 to your account. Mark, these are all I have. I'll save the rest and withdraw it tomorrow. After a while, Nancy, I'm not mad at you. This kind of thing can only be done between boyfriends and girlfriends. You already have a fiancé. I took the money and sent him a voice message. Mark, I will pretend that this never happened and it won't affect your innocence. This sentence interrupted the casting on the other side. After a while, Mark sent 2 dry words, okay. I lay on the bed, imagining what Mark's expression would be like now, and suddenly saw a message from Jane. Jane is my cousin. After my uncle and aunt passed away, my parents took her home to take care of her. I always treated her as my own sister. It was not until my family went bankrupt that I realized that she had been jealous of our family for so many years. She was jealous of my family's wealth, jealous of me growing up being spoiled by my parents, and hated that I was engaged to the boy she had a crush on. She deliberately leaked confidential company documents, and showed her affection with my fiancé in front of the hospital bed, which made my father so angry that he had a cardiac arrest. Jane's voice was sweet on the phone. Did you quarrel with Frank again? I booked a table at the bar tonight and called Frank. This time I will force him to apologize to you. It was like this again. Whenever my fiancé and I had a conflict, Jane would always play the role of a close sister and persuade us. But the more she persuaded, the worse the relationship between Frank and me became. Listening to her gentle voice, I smiled. Cousin, do you think too highly of yourself? You forced Frank to apologize to me. Are you his mother or his grandmother? You are talking nonsense. Don't think I can't hear it. Jane was slightly stunned. Nancy, how can you say such harsh words to your sister? I said nonchalantly, I don't know. It may have something to do with my upbringing. After hanging up the phone, I asked a makeup artist to put on a nightclub makeup that would attract men. I was in a good mood and set off because I found out that Mark worked part-time at this bar at night, and it would be nice to go to my future husband's place to show his face. Mark was cleaning the messy table in the bar. Under the ambiguous and blurred light, he held a rag and mopped the floor very seriously. He was not selling his body or his skills, but just selling his hard work. I don't know how many people's eyes were attracted by her broad shoulders, narrow waist, perky hips and long legs. When she saw me, her eyebrows were heavily knitted. Before he could speak, Jane came out of the box to greet me. She glanced at Mark. "This male model is good, do you like him?" Mark explained with a cold face, "I'm not." Jane waved her hand nonchalantly, then asked the manager to call a group of male models over, and they must be of the highest quality. Jane pulled me into the box, where several of her friends were sitting. "Nancy, Frank is very stubborn and won't apologize." Jane smiled. "There are more than one man in the world. If you ask me, you should try something else. When Frank gets jealous, he will admit his mistake." Her friend echoed, "There are many beautiful women in the world. Why should you love only one? Frank is nothing." Jane clapped her hands, and the door of the box opened. Male models of different styles came in one after another, bringing in a pungent smell of perfume. Mark walked at the end, calmly placing fruit plates and drinks on the table. "Pick the best one and keep you company at night. Just think of it as a gift from me as your sister to relieve your boredom." Jane looked considerate. Her friends secretly raised their mobile phones, just to take a video and send it to Frank to alienate me from him. I have seen so many such despicable means after I went bankrupt in my previous life. Then you, and you. I ordered the 3 most expensive male models in the venue, turned my head and smiled at Jane. "Cousin, I have a big appetite, so I'm sorry to have you spend money tonight." My parents gave Jane and me the same amount of pocket money, but Jane spent money lavishly and loved to show off in front of her friends, so I have always been the one who silently covered her up. I'm afraid she will have to max out her credit card tonight. Jane smiled reluctantly. "It's okay, as long as you like it, who makes me your sister?" I hugged the 3 male models on my left and right, and before leaving, I glanced at Mark who was still arranging the fruit plate. He is so dedicated, he is squeezing the watermelon slices into watermelon juice. Jane opened a luxury suite for me, and the room card in her hand was suddenly taken away. Mark stood in front of me, breathing quickly. "Nancy, this is not the place to fool around." "I know, so I plan to fool around somewhere else." Mark's face was pale. Several male models teased, "Do part-time workers want to join us? How can they serve Miss Nancy if they are so dull? Boy, go and mop your floor." Mark pursed his lips tightly and said nothing. Until I reached out to grab the key from his hand, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me into his arms, with his strong arms across my waist. I struggled for a while, and Mark hugged me tighter. I looked up and met his wet eyes, my eyelashes were trembling slightly, and his hot breath sprayed in my ears. "Don't choose them, choose me." The suppressed voice was about to break. "Miss, choose me, I'm cleaner than them." I finally understand why the male protagonist in the CEO novel falls in love with the stubborn little white flower female protagonist at first sight. I may not be a good person. Seeing Mark's forbearing and fragile appearance, I just want to bully him more. Until I was taken to the hotel suite, Mark still kept holding me in his arms, with a dazed look, as if he didn't know why things had developed to this point. "Nancy. Call me Mississippi." I raised my index finger and touched his lips, pressing hard provocatively. "Why are you frowning, Mark? Weren't you very brave when you drove those 3 away just now? If you say you are better than them, is it here or here?" The muscles under my palms suddenly stiffened as if they had been electrocuted. Before I could appreciate the boy's shameful and angry look, my wrist was grabbed. "Nancy, do you have to do this?" Those eyes were dark, wrapped in deep and surging desires, thicker than the night outside the window, and looked creepy. I smiled and raised my head, and pecked his protruding Adam's apple. Mark's fierce mask shattered to the ground, his breathing was disordered, and he chased my lips and kissed me. The 29-year-old Mark is always calm and strong, gentle and introverted. The 19-year-old Mark is just the opposite. He is like a tireless calf, with endless brute force. He gets excited after a few provocations. He has no skills, only knows how to plunder awkwardly, and is very stupid. I looked up and kissed his tense chin. Classmate Mark, who is the person of questionable character. He looked down at me, said nothing, and just kept his head down to work. Classmate Mark is really stubborn in every way. Stop talking. Mark covered my eyes in frustration, his movements were fierce, but the kiss he gave was full of pious desire. Suddenly losing sight, hearing became more sensitive. I boldly teased, "Classmate Mark, you scream so beautifully." This time, my mouth was also blocked by the aggressive momentum. I was like a 3-fold mobile phone, and Mark treated me like a treasure, tossing and turning until dawn. When there was a knock on the door, Mark subconsciously lifted the quilt and wrapped me tightly. "Nancy, open the door quickly, I know you are in there, you dare to cheat on me and dare not open the door?" Frank's angry voice floated into the room without missing a word. Mark seemed to have just woken up. His bloodshot eyes looked away from my face in embarrassment. His fingers tightly grasped the bed sheet. Do you need me to hide? The air was filled with a blushing and heart-pounding smell. Mark's chest and back were all scratched, not to mention the cracked corners of his mouth. He looked like a wolf cub who was overly bullied but still kept his head down. Inexplicably, I didn't want others to see his current appearance. Frank's roar outside was endless, mixed with Jane's gentle soothing voice, which was very annoying. I called the phone directly and cried loudly into the phone, "Mom and Dad, my cousin is pregnant with Frank's child. I was cheated, woo-woo." After hanging up the phone rang one after another outside the door. Frank and Jane explained to the phone in a panic. Gradually, the sound outside the door faded away. The tears that were squeezed out with great difficulty were gently wiped away by Mark. His brows knitted together. They betrayed you.
Yeah.
Don't cry, it's not worth it. In novels, the male protagonist will say all kinds of sweet words to make people happy, but Mark can't. He can only say these dry words over and over again. My eyes were filled with tears, and I gave him a wink, hoping that he would coax me more. Mark was silent for a while and seemed to have made up his mind. He said solemnly, "Nancy, I will pretend that this never happened. It won't affect your innocence. Go away, you're throwing your winks to the dogs." I took a deep breath. Mark, don't you have anything to confess to me? Who saved me when I fell into the water in my second year of high school? In high school, Mark and I went to the same school. When he came to work part-time, my parents paid him extra wages to let him take care of me. In more popular terms, Mark was my follower. He didn't seem to care about other people's ridicule of him. He always called me miss in a serious manner and followed me dutifully. During the summer vacation of my second year in high school, I went camping in the mountains with a few peers in my circle. While playing, I was swept into the river by the turbulent current. When I woke up, Frank and I were lying in the same ward. Everyone said that Frank risked his life to save me. I regarded him as a benefactor and treated him with favor and tolerance. At the same time, Mark quit his part-time job and transferred to another school, and there was no news. It was not until I opened my diary in my previous life that I knew the truth. The person who saved me was obviously Mark, a big fool. I retrieved the original medical records from the hospital. In order to save me, he broke both legs, and his calves were scratched by stones with many deep bloody scars that could be seen to the bone. He disappeared from my world quietly with injuries all over his body. In the diary, Mark did not write the reason. Now that I questioned him, he subconsciously grabbed the bed sheet. I don't know. Still pretending. I got angry and hooked his neck directly, bit the other corner of his lip, and took a big bite. Do you understand now? His eyelids trembled, and he lowered his voice. Sorry, it's late, I have to go sell pancakes. I laughed angrily. I am the eldest daughter of Nancy's family, but I am not as important as a piece of multigrain pancake. The 29-year-old Mark is obviously not like this. When he heard me cough on the phone, he would immediately end his work and rush back from abroad. No matter how busy he was on a business trip, he would remember to bring me all kinds of small gifts I like. I found a job, and he would definitely take a detour to send me to work and pick me up after get off work every day. The assistant said that for a big boss like Mark, time is more precious than money. He said he didn't love me and couldn't do it, but he left all the most precious things to me. I was probably spoiled by Mark and couldn't accept such a big gap 10 years ago. When we got home, everyone was there. Jane knelt on the ground crying, "Aunt, Uncle, Frank and I are innocent. I don't know why my sister wants to slander me." Frank helped her up, his face full of anger. "Nancy, don't be unreasonable. There is no need to involve innocent people in our conflict. She is your sister, not a servant. Why should she kneel down to you?" My mother hugged Jane distressfully and comforted her in a gentle voice. My father also said in a stern voice that he would give her justice. I still can't figure out what qualifications Jane has to hate our whole family so much, just for a man? If she had said directly that she liked Frank in her previous life, I would have happily fulfilled their wish. But she didn't. She was submissive on the surface, but she was planning how to kill me and my parents in her heart. Seeing that I didn't say anything, Frank became more confident. "You went to the bar to order male models, wasn't it just to piss me off and force me to make peace with you? Can you change your temper? Who else can stand you except me? If you can't stand it, break off the engagement," I said coldly and went upstairs to my room. Frank was angry and left. At dinner, there were only Jane and I at home. She had swollen eyes and forced a smile. "Nancy, Frank really likes you. You treated him so well, but he didn't think of breaking off the engagement. That's because he's a bitch." I slowly put rice into my mouth, cousin, give me some of the things you put in the hotel that night. I knew she had put aphrodisiac incense in the suite in advance, otherwise Mark wouldn't be so out of control. Although he looked cute when he was out of control. Jane wanted to argue, but I interrupted her with a smile. Give it to me, or I will call the police. Jane could no longer pretend to be weak, and looked at me in fear and shock. Nancy, what do you want to do? I sighed. I feel sorry for my cousin. If you are really pregnant with Frank's child, are you afraid that he will not marry you? In her previous life, Jane was indeed pregnant, and she joined hands with Frank to destroy my family's business. She fantasized about becoming Frank's wife, but she didn't expect that without the protection of my family, her gentleness and thoughtfulness became worthless in Frank's eyes. Frank was still going to marry me like crazy. On the wedding day, Jane rushed over with a fruit knife. In the chaos, I kindly pushed Frank and happened to hit the blade. After a day and a night of rescue, although Frank saved his life, he became a vegetable. Even though Jane yelled and cursed that the person she wanted to stab was me, she was still inevitably sent to prison by Frank's family, and the child in her belly was naturally not saved. Frank's only bloodline was gone, but in his half-dead state, none of this mattered. Frank's family realized later that this was my revenge, but they couldn't find any evidence, and gnashed their teeth to promote their son as a pure love warrior, a deep-hearted person who took the knife for his fiancée. I'm afraid Mark is the only fool in the world who thought I was deeply in love with Frank. Before he died, he hired more than a dozen bodyguards for me, bought several properties abroad, and secretly formed a high-tech medical team to study vegetative rehabilitation technology. In the suicide note, he told me calmly and distantly that Nancy was free, and he supported her no matter what kind of life she chose. I ran back to the room, pressed the yellowed diary in my arms, and tears fell on the back of my hand. I called Mark confidently, "Husband, they all bullied me." I wanted to take Mark to the hospital for a physical examination. There were still 10 years before he died of stomach cancer, and everything was still in time. But Mark avoided me for more than half a month, as if I was a flood beast that could eat people. I had to block people in front of the pancake stall. Mark's eyes were cold, totally different from the passionate one that night. I smiled and said, "Boss Mark, add a sausage and 2 eggs." The boy had a blank expression like a robot, but his hands shook and got blisters from the hot iron plate. "You are hurt, but I am hurt. Since Mark can't say sweet words, I will do it." I took the opportunity and said earthy love words crazily. Mark's ears were visibly red. I was about to tease him when I heard a sneer from behind. A Porsche on the roadside rolled down its window. Frank propped his forehead up leisurely. "Nancy, have you had enough of the trouble these past few days? Do you think you can make me jealous just by finding a random guy?" He glanced at Mark's back with a mocking look on his face, and he's such a lowly man. "Come back with me and apologize to Sister Jane, be good." "Be good, sir." I picked up the ketchup on the table and splashed it all over his head and face. "Lick it clean and I'll go apologize." Frank wanted to save face. With ketchup all over his head and face and being watched by people, he didn't bother to wipe off the mess and quickly raised the window. More and more people came to watch the fun. Mark pursed his lips and left without saying a word. I trotted after him, but he ignored me no matter how I called him. In order to avoid me, he went into the bathroom. I chased him in, and Mark's eyelids jumped. "This is the men's restroom. Then come with me to the women's restroom." He ignored my humor and said in a cold voice, "Nancy, I won't go to the hospital with you, and you don't have to care about my business." "I want to care." Mark was silent for a few seconds. When he raised his eyes, there was a cold smile in his eyes. That night was just a money and sex transaction, don't think too much. I resisted the urge to beat him up. Sex, I tasted it, and the money, did you take it? Or, does Mark want to pay monthly? He was speechless, and even his white neck was pink. I was about to make a few jokes, but there was footsteps outside, and Mark quickly pulled me into the toilet cubicle. "It's a bit dirty." I wrinkled my nose in disgust and pulled Mark's sleeve. He lowered his eyes and looked at me, his expression indifferent, but his hand honestly held my waist. I stepped on his shoes, and the top of my head rubbed his chin, and the distance between us suddenly shortened. The cool woody fragrance on the boy's body diluted the smell of the toilet. In the quiet space, the sound of water dripping outside the door was infinitely amplified, accompanied by the man's whistle. Mark frowned and raised his hand to cover my ears. "Come with me to the hospital." I lip-synced. Mark ignored me, and I stretched my hand down, holding the emperor to command the princes. "Are you going?" I applied a little force on my hand, and a low, hoarse groan escaped from my ear. "FK." The whistle outside the door stopped, and the door panel against which Mark leaned was knocked twice. "Dude, is it so exciting to do handicrafts in the toilet in broad daylight?" Facing Mark's warning eyes, I clenched my palms with evil intentions. The small cubicle suddenly burst into an uncontrollable gasp, and because of forbearance, even the back of the hand bulged with blue veins. Not going? Don't force me to kiss you here. He tightened his jaw and nodded stiffly. The people outside had already left, and the plan succeeded. I pulled Mark to go out, but he pulled my wrist away. He looked away in panic. You go out first. I glanced down and said, Mark, don't do handicrafts for too long, it's not good for your health. His face was completely dark. It's fun to tease my husband. To be on the safe side, I made an appointment for a full physical examination. Looking at the long checklist, Mark frowned in resistance. Why do you have to check so many items? Of course, I can't say that I'm afraid he has cancer. I threw him a coquettish look. To be my man, of course you have to stay healthy. Nancy, I'm not. He retorted coldly. Well, Mark, do you like bed play? If you don't want me to kiss you in the hospital, shut up and do the examination honestly. Mark opened his eyes slightly, as if he was scared. Crossing the corridor, he suddenly stopped. Nancy, don't. You talk too much. I pushed him into the small room next to me impatiently, pressed him against the door panel, and kissed him on tiptoe. Until the heartbeat under my palm became more and more intense, I was afraid that he would die suddenly. When he pulled away from my lips, he subconsciously opened his lips and chased forward. After realizing what he had done, Mark's face was extremely ugly. He raised his hand to cover my eyes, and his palms were shaking. Don't look. Mark, who was 19 years old, had a thin skin like paper. He became obedient after being kissed. He didn't say a word during the whole day of examination. The examination results were not good. Mark had more than a dozen polyps in his stomach. The nature was difficult to judge, so they could only be removed for pathological examination. Is there a family history? The doctor asked. Grandpa and Grandma both died of stomach cancer. Mark's eyes were empty, and I didn't know what he was thinking. The doctor showed pity in his eyes. Go to the hospital as soon as possible to remove it. Mark didn't cooperate at all. He just finished the hospitalization and wanted to escape the next day. I was caught red-handed. I was angry at his indifferent attitude towards his body. Mark, if you continue to abuse your body like this, I won't like you anymore. I threw the instant noodle box into the cabinet and put the nutritious breakfast I brought on the table. It wasn't until a spoon was stuffed into his hand that Mark seemed to come to his senses. He was furious. Nancy, are you too confident? Who wants your likes? 29-year-old Mark is gentle and open-minded, and never attacks people with harsh words. Sick people are always particularly fragile. I sighed in my heart and didn't intend to care. Mark threw the spoon back into the bowl, and the boiling soup splashed on my arm, instantly turning it red. Mark's face turned pale, and he looked away, saying in a stiff and cold tone, Miss Nancy likes to serve people so much, why don't you go to the hospital and apply for a nursing position? This was the first time I heard Mark speak in a sarcastic way to me. My arm was stinging, but it was not as uncomfortable as the tightness in my chest. I sneered, Mark, don't be angry with me. He seemed to be deliberately against me, took out the instant noodles and poured warm water on them. He ate them quickly and hurriedly before they were soaked. I turned around and left. At noon, the nurse called and said that Mark had just left the hospital and didn't say where he was going. Did you have instant noodles for lunch again? I asked. He ate all the breakfast that Miss Nancy brought before he left. Did you heat it up? No. I don't know why, but I felt even more uncomfortable. I would rather he had hot instant noodles. Mark has always lived a frugal life. The first time he brought me into an empty villa in my previous life, I thought it was his idle property and he was planning to keep a mistress in it. Later I found out that this was his home. The villa has 3 floors. Mark only has a guest bedroom without a balcony and a small study. There are only a few clothes in the closet that belong to him. The 2nd and 3rd floors are my dressing room, cloakroom, audiovisual room, and tea room. The villa is full of my things. Sometimes I feel embarrassed and ask Mark, am I a little too much? I don't have the slightest sense of being my first love. Mark, who was reading a document, was stunned for a moment, slowly took off his frameless glasses, and a soft smile filled his black eyes. Miss, this is your home. He whispered in a deep voice, more like a coaxing, it's not too much to go a little bit. Alas, my good husband, how can he have such a long rebellious adolescence? Mark didn't go back to school. According to the address given by his roommate, I found his residence. I knocked a few times, but no one answered. The door was locked with a password. I casually entered my birthday and the door opened. Mark was not at home. The house was decorated coldly, with only black, white and gray, and the home furnishings were very simple. A familiar pink tinge appeared on the pillow. I took it out and saw that it was indeed a diary, the diary of Mark when he was 19 years old. It was not moral to read a diary secretly, so I confessed my guilt while opening it with great interest. Well, the content was very similar to the one in my room. The only difference was that Mark and I had no intersection during college in my previous life, so he only wrote a few awkward sentences occasionally, such as "I saw the young lady again, my heart was beating fast and I dreamed about it, I was about to explode." And the latest page of this diary, the handwriting was intermittent and trembling like a wavy line. He wrote, "I finally belong to the young lady." The date marked was that night in the bar. I wanted to laugh a little. He is really the same as he was in the past 10 years. There was a safe next to the bed that was out of place in the simple room. I could enter the correct password with my eyes closed. When I saw what was inside, tears came out first. Will, the familiar black and white words. Mark, who had to work to earn tuition since his teenage years after his parents died, had to work hard to earn so much money. 1,200,000, probably all his assets. Just like in his previous life, he left everything to me. I wiped my tears and opened the letter he left for me. "Nancy, I don't mean anything else. I am grateful to my uncle and aunt for taking care of me in high school. This money is my way of repaying you. You can do whatever you want with it. Don't think too much." The date was last night. I suddenly realized that I was feeling lucky these days. As long as the operation is done, Mark will be healthy and safe to accompany me until old age. But the 19-year-old Mark didn't know that fear is human instinct. He would be afraid of suffering from a terminal illness like his grandparents. He is not the Mr. Mark who will be strategizing in the business world 10 years later. I should be more patient. What can I do if I coax him more? He is already suffering enough. I wanted to fly to Mark's side immediately. Just as I was about to close the safe, my eyes were attracted by the white sheets on the bottom layer. I took a closer look and saw the hotel logo on the label of the sheets. Mark brought back the sheets from the hotel that night. It was simply unbearable to look at. I quickly locked the safe and fled the room with a burning face. A sultry little pervert. During the days when Mark was preparing for surgery, I became the most diligent student in their major. I took full notes in every class and asked Mark's roommate to send them back to the dormitory. After a few times, the boys couldn't help it and asked me what the relationship between Mark and me was. I smiled and said, "I have had a crush on Mark for a long time." Several of them were so surprised that they could stuff eggs into their mouths. Under my brainwashing day after day, Mark's sky fell on the day he was discharged from the hospital and returned to school. Almost everyone knows that Mark, the school idol, has a fanatical pursuer. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I stood downstairs of the boys' dormitory. Mark was helpless. "Nancy, what do you want to do?" I looked up. "Have you brushed your teeth?" He was stunned for a moment and frowned. That mouth. I immediately tiptoed and kissed him, and there was a smell of mint toothpaste. I gently poked his chest. "I don't like it. Let's change to lemon next time." Mark grabbed my hand, his ears red. "Nancy, can you not? Don't be like this." He couldn't say a complete sentence because I blocked his mouth again. "Mark, the pathology results are out, you are not sick, you will be healthy in the future. Is it so difficult to admit that you like me?" I cried in grievance. Mark was stunned and stiff. I cried and sobbed. "Don't cry." Mark raised his hand and pressed me into his arms, sighing softly, "I don't deserve it, miss, I am not a good person, you will regret being with me." I pinched his chest muscles hard. "Dying under the peony flowers, being a ghost is also romantic." Mark groaned and tightened the airtight embrace. His expressionless face could not stop his little brother from greeting me in agreement. "Mark, I haven't had breakfast yet."
"Yeah."
He took a deep breath, seemed to finally calm down, and said uncomfortably, "I'll go buy it." In less than 10 minutes, he came back with a hot breakfast, all of which were my favorites. In a trance, it seemed that I saw Mark who was around me in high school, and it seemed that he was Mr. Mark who solved all the troubles for me at the age of 29. The photo of me and Mark hugging was uploaded to the forum. Some people said that I was too timing, being engaged to Frank while hooking up with Mark, the school hunk. Those malicious comments were deleted by the system not long after they were posted. I poked Mark, who was sitting upright. "Did you delete it?"
"Yeah."
They said nonsense. After a lot of pestering, I successfully moved into Mark's house. But someone was very serious. He would rather pitch up a tent high every night to sleep in the living room and give me the bedroom. There was a new post on the forum, revealing that everything had nothing to do with Nancy, and it was Mark who shamelessly harassed the other party. I handed over the tablet. Which kind-hearted person posted this? Mark closed the forum page with an unnatural expression. Don't read these, it affects your mood. You can tell who did it with your toes. I laughed and threw myself into Mark's arms. He was afraid that I would fall, so he reflexively supported my waist. Oh, how should I thank my hero? I lowered my head slightly and approached. Mark closed his eyes, pursed his thin lips slightly, and a hint of red appeared on his ears. I chuckled. Is Mark asking for a kiss? Realizing that he was fooled, he opened his eyes in embarrassment and turned his face to the side. I rubbed the red earlobe with amusement, making it hotter and hotter. Mark is so patient. I leaned over and kissed him, then bear it for a while, I will give you a name. How could I bear to let the little pervert who was coaxed with great difficulty be the third party? A marriage between wealthy families cannot be cancelled just by saying so. Even if Jane exaggerated in front of Frank's parents that I had a gigolo outside, Frank's family had no intention of regretting the marriage. They also said that as long as I was willing to be Frank's daughter-in-law, they would give me absolute freedom. To put it bluntly, they were just thinking about Nancy's family's property behind me. I was determined to cancel the engagement, and even Frank's intense reaction would not help. In the busy campus, he pulled my arm tightly, his face grim. You want to break up the engagement just because I didn't comfort you during the last quarrel. How can you do this to me? I won't allow it. Frank roughly dragged me to the car. I was about to take out my phone to call the police when Mark suddenly pushed through the crowd and rushed over, punching Frank in the face. Frank covered his face in pain and let go. Seeing the bruises on my wrist, Mark's eyes were cold. He raised his leg and kicked Frank in the heart, pinning him down and punching him hard. When the security arrived, Frank fell to the ground with his face swollen like a pig's head, his mouth full of blood. I held Mark's arm and shook it hard, and the hostility in his eyes gradually dissipated. He held my hand, unable to hide his heartache. If he hadn't been stopped, I'm afraid he would have kicked Frank twice more. Not long after arriving at the police station, Frank's parents cried and rushed to their son. Jane came with my parents. She bit her lip and stood silently behind Frank. Frank's family wanted to send Mark to jail for intentional injury. My father was the first one who was not happy. How can a heroic act be called intentional injury? He smiled and held Mark's hand. Young man, I will personally send a banner to thank you for saving my daughter one day. Mark opened his mouth to explain, but after I glared at him, he shut up obediently. Frank's parents were speechless. To put it bluntly, Frank's pulling me in public was kidnapping, which was illegal. Frank's family had to swallow their anger and hurriedly took their son to the hospital. Jane hesitated for a moment and followed. My mother pulled me aside, glanced at Mark who was being questioned by my father, and whispered, "Is he the boy you forced that night?" Even if I was as thick-skinned as I was, I couldn't help but cough. After my rebirth, I immediately monitored Jane. I sent her drug purchase order and the surveillance video of drugging to my parents. In the version I narrated, I was drugged and thirsty, and I randomly took away the innocence of an innocent male college student. Mark, have you forgotten? Didn't you and my dad sponsor him to go to college? My mother looked surprised. Our foundation only sponsors primary and secondary school students in poor areas, and college students are not included in the sponsorship. I nodded, numb. It seems that this is another lie that Mark made up in his previous life to make me feel at ease to accept the inheritance. Okay, he is so good. On the way back, I didn't say a word. Mark took out the medicine box and applied ointment to me, half kneeling in front of the sofa. Does it hurt? In fact, the red mark on my wrist has almost disappeared, but I didn't say anything. Mark showed a little annoyance. Seeing that I still ignored him, he felt a little aggrieved and lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. What are you sorry for? I lifted his chin. He didn't resist. Instead, he seemed to be afraid that the weight of his head would press on my fingers. He consciously put his chin on my fingers and said hoarsely, I hit him too hard. I'm sorry. I was stunned for a moment, then realized that he was talking about Frank. He thought I was blaming him for beating Frank. I was almost amused. Mark, I'll say it one last time. I like you, only you. I don't mind if you beat Frank to death, but you have to pay with your life if Frank dies. Do you want me to be a widow for you? Mark frowned, again. I pinched his cheek in annoyance. I don't care. Anyway, your life is mine. You are not allowed to ruin yourself without my permission. Mark's facial features are stiff, and there is not much flesh on his cheeks. They were pulled out of shape, ugly and handsome. He gave up resistance and looked at me helplessly. I know. I rubbed him. You are so good. I will reward you tonight. I glanced down meaningfully, and his ears turned red. He emphasized, I am not so lustful, and I don't think about that kind of thing every day. He went into the kitchen to cook, and the apron was tied tightly, outlining a beautiful waistline. The kitchen door was not closed, and he walked back and forth in front of me with a spatula in his hand, looking for soy sauce and vinegar. This little sultry. I sent the news of the private detective investigation to my parents. Knowing that Frank and I had broken up, Jane still chose to stand on Frank's side and didn't even call back. After the drugging of me, my father had long withdrawn his love for Jane. My mother cried and saw Jane clearly. When asked what I planned to do, I asked the servants to pack up all the worthless things in Jane's room and send them to her school, and sell all the valuable bags and jewelry, exchange them for cash and donate them to poor mountainous areas, and stop her pocket money. Jane was used to a life of extravagance, and she couldn't stand it in less than a week. She and Frank, who had just been discharged from the hospital, blocked me at the door of the classroom. I held Mark's hand and signaled him not to be impulsive. Jane repeated the same trick and knelt down again, sobbing and begging, Nancy, it's all my fault. Please let me go home. I really can't bear to leave my aunt and uncle. Her eyes were blurred with tears, and she longed for Frank to be her savior like last time. But Frank didn't even look at her, staring at me. Nancy, I asked her to apologize to you. Let's reconcile and don't break up. Jane looked up in disbelief. I took Mark a step back to avoid being tainted by bad luck. Stung by my disgusted eyes, Frank suddenly sneered and pointed at Mark. You like him? Don't be naive, Nancy. Do you think he is sincere to you? You don't know how despicable this man is. Mark's hand froze for a moment. Frank looked at the crowd in the classroom and raised his voice. Your school hunk took 300,000 yuan from me and promised to leave my fiancé. How can such a money-hungry bastard have true love? Nancy, you are too stupid. Many eyes looked at Mark, surprised, contemptuous, and disgusted. Mark didn't care. He was a bastard who had been struggling in the mud. He was so poor that he couldn't even eat meat since he was a child. How could he have any self-esteem? But in front of Nancy, he tried his best to maintain a bit of decency. Even if he couldn't get her love, he didn't want to be hated more. That year, he saved the eldest lady who fell into the water, and his legs were broken by the rocks at the bottom of the river. He was in a coma for a day because of the pain. As soon as he woke up, he received the bad news that his grandfather was critically ill. The surgery cost 300,000 yuan, which Frank gave him. In exchange, Mark needed to disappear in front of Nancy and couldn't mention the matter of saving people to anyone. Mark knew that after taking this money, he would be further away from Nancy, and he shouldn't have any extravagant hopes. He is mean and shameless. After the college entrance examination, he found out that Mark went to the same school as her. He had no other thoughts. It was good enough to just pass by. It would be better if he could take a look. Every time the young lady touched him, he almost died. He endured and dared not move. His heart uncontrollably grew a desire for her approach, fearing that his despicable inner self would be seen through. The feelings that could not be expressed in words bloomed the flowers of eternal life on his broken and dirty soul. Until the girl next to him held his hand tightly and pulled his ear playfully. Classmate Mark, are you a fool? Is this lady only worth 300,000? Mark looked like he was facing a great enemy. I thought there was something, but in the end, it was just this. Frank, you are so stingy. I am ashamed to have an ex-fiancé like you. I didn't care what Frank, who had a hideous face, was thinking. I dragged Mark out of the crowd. When we reached the secluded corridor, Mark suddenly hugged me from behind, his chin gently resting on my shoulder, and his breath tickled my ears. Miss, he said hoarsely, I'm not a good person. I rolled my eyes. I've heard this sentence so many times in my 2 lives that my ears are almost calloused. So? I asked unhappily. I like Miss very much. He spoke slowly, his tone was awkward and extremely serious. I covered my violently beating heart. It was obviously not a passionate love talk, but my heart was moved in a useless way. I knew it a long time ago. Miss. He called again in a low voice, his voice was broken and lingering, and he had no idea how seductive he looked. He carefully touched my ear with his lips. Miss. I shuddered and stopped him. Don't shout, shout at night. Jane was pregnant with Frank's child, but Frank's parents refused to let her in. Just like in her previous life, she tried to bring down Nancy's family to please Frank's parents. But in this life, I had already reminded my parents, and the police arrested Jane at Frank's house right after Jane took the company documents. Jane was sentenced to 3 years for stealing company secrets. Frank's family certainly didn't want to care about her, but Jane was pregnant with Frank's child. With this guarantee, she lived comfortably in prison. Frank came to my house many times to get back together, but was driven out by my parents. He didn't want to admit the existence of the child in Jane's belly. He was depressed and went to race cars with his friends. The brake line was tampered with. Frank and his car flipped down the mountain. Although he survived, he was injured and lost his fertility. The child in Jane's belly became all the hope of Frank's family. They secretly asked someone to identify it, and it was a boy. In the end, the child was not saved. Jane relied on her belly to be domineering in prison, and there were many people who disliked her. After the child was aborted, her only value was gone, and Frank's family threw her away like garbage. Jane wrote many letters to Nancy's house. Before the letters were delivered to my parents, I told the servants to throw them into the trash can. Mark opened a company and stopped selling pancakes every day. I asked him why, and he said it smelled. So what? He didn't say anything with red ears. At night, while he was taking a shower, I shamelessly peeked at his diary. The boys in the diary were too honest. If you have a smell on your body, you can't be kissed by a young lady. I put the diary away silently. Mark came out, and I sniffed. It's over, a classmate Mark, I just lit the incense Jane gave me. Mark's body stiffened, and I leaned crookedly into his arms, and my hands tactfully pulled off the annoying bath towel, touched it twice, and looked up and asked, Mark, are you hot? His Adam's apple rolled twice, his collarbone was pink, his hand silently held my waist, and his voice was hoarse, hot. The sheets were dirty again, and Mark changed a set. I sat on the bed with my legs crossed and swayed. His eyes dropped, and his movements became slower and slower. Finally, he threw away the sheets and slowly half-knelt beside the bed. I raised my leg to his chest, and he held it obediently, kissing it upwards with concentration. With his other hand, he opened the bedside table and opened another box. He tilted his head and looked at me with wet eyes. It's uncomfortable, miss, I want more. The whole night, the little pervert said a lot of dirty words, blushing, and repeated the inner thoughts in the diary many times. Knowing what I like, he deliberately bit my ear and shouted, Miss likes it, kiss me more, okay? He was not annoyed even when he was bullied. His black eyes were bright like a tamed puppy, and he had no bottom line, Miss, you can do whatever you want to me. Oh, so when the sun rose, I held his misbehaving hand and said with a wicked smile, Classmate Mark, the incense is fake, but the way you burn is real. His movements seemed to have been paused. Just looking at his back, he looked like a husband. He quickly covered my eyes with his eyes and hands, don't look. His voice was ashamed, and he was about to cry. I was just about to coax his fragile little heart when Mark suddenly bent down and kissed me. He panted and held my lips and tongue obsessively. It's too late for you to know, Mississippi. I'm not a good person. I want to be with you forever. I really like this sweet talk.